I love the ocean more than anything in the world. I love being on the ocean. I love fishing on the ocean. It's kind of, that's it for me. I was reeling in my line and I look up, and about 200 yards kind of off our port bow, there was like National Geographic video of tuna just boiling on the surface, crashing on this little bait fish that are called sorry. And they're eating these little like 1.5 to 2-inch, really thin bait fish. And I was watching these things and they're coming. I just stood on the bow and waited till it got within casting range. And I made a cast into, what had to have been 1,000 albacore, just frothing, boiling, watered madness. And it's the single coolest fly cast I've ever made in my entire life. And I was shaking so bad, thinking as soon as my fly hit the water, it's just going to get murdered. How could it not, And I was fishing like a 5-inch kind of anchovy pattern. And I made probably a dozen casts into those fish, and they didn't even sniff it, wouldn't look at it. They were so keyed in on these tiny little bait fish, that big 5-inch fly, they wanted nothing to do with it. You have to come to terms with the fact that you are never going to control where an albacore goes. You can't turn it head. If you're a good angler, you can turn the head on a 40-pound Chinook. You are never, ever going to turn the head of a 10-pound albacore.
Hey, welcome back to the Young Guides podcast. I'm Keaton, and
I'm Kyle.
And we have a great episode ahead. But first, Kyle has some words to tell you.
Yeah, I just wanted to check in with you guys. As we mentioned on our previous episode, we are now an affiliate with Heather's Choice. If you go to the Heather's Choice website and use our code TheYoungGuides10, that's TheYoungGuides10 at checkout, you can save yourself 10% off of any meal, whether that be a breakfast or a dinner, or off of packaroons. Again, we have our seasonal packaroons in stock right now. We have candy cane, Santa's Cold, ginger snap, and eggnog. I really can't choose a favorite of mine from those 4. They're all really good. So get those while you can. They're great stocking stuffers for the holiday season. Go check out heatherschoice.com and get ready for your next outdoor adventure. Back to Keaton.
Awesome. So we have a really exciting guest today. Today's guest is going to be Nick Clayton. He's a fly fishing guide. He's a regular gear guide out on the coast for tuna. And then he also runs his own guide service for searun cutthroats. We're very excited to have Nick. Nick is an awesome guy. I've done a trip with him before. Like I said, it's a very exciting podcast. He's got some great information to share. And then one other thing I'd just like to mention is away from it is thanks everyone for taking the time and listening to our podcast. Me and Kyle are very grateful. We've got a lot of great feedback just starting out. So, we're going to keep staying after it and bringing good episodes the best we can for you. And we hope you keep enjoying them. So anything you want to add on to that, Kyle?
No, I think you said it well, Keaton. We really appreciate everybody listening to us on the podcast, your engagement on our social media platforms, and people just reaching out to us personally saying that they like the podcast. And we even have people reaching out that could be potential featured guests. So we appreciate that. And we just hope that you will continue your support for what Keaton and I started doing.
Yeah. And like Kyle mentioned, we are on social media. Our only social media right now is Instagram. We are getting a website up, but our Instagram is the Young Guides Podcast. So just give us a follow on that, or if you have, you can DM me or Kyle on that too, and we can answer questions or anything you might have from a podcast, or, if you're a young guide or you're a guide in general that is looking to possibly be on this podcast, you can reach out to us there as well. So
I do have one more. I just thought of one more thing.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to come to Alaska next summer and want to do some fishing on the road system, the outfitter that I work for, Bear Paw River Guides, is providing a little bit of a promotional kind of like a giveaway kind of thing between now, which is today's the day before Thanksgiving, until December 24th. If you book a trip between now and December 24th with Bear Paw River Guides for the 2022 season, you are entered into a chance to get 50% off of your trip. So if you've ever wanted to come fish Alaska, fish the road system, we're only an hour and a half north of Anchorage. We have salmon fishing for 4 of the 5 species of salmon. We have rainbow trout. We have grayling. You can come and fish the bead drop in the fall. You can fish and catch as many pinks as you want in late July, early August. You can come put some cohos in the freezer if you come in later summer, early fall, or if you want to hit that smolt migration early spring for some big rainbows, you can come do that. Or if you just want to catch some big grayling on dry flies, you can come do that too. So we have really good Alaska fishing, an hour and a half from Anchorage. You could be off the plane, standing in Willow within just a few hours and having some extraordinary Alaska fishing. So if you ever wanted to fish up there, book a trip between now, December 24th with Bear Paw River Guides, and you have a chance to get 50% off of your trip. So find us on the website, or you can contact us or social media. We can get you to Shane, who will get that on the calendar.
Awesome. And as Kyle mentioned before, today is the day before Thanksgiving. So we are hoping from the Young Guides podcast to you guys that you have a great, safe Thanksgiving. If you're not celebrating Thanksgiving, we still hope you have a great, weekend, or if you're, just doing a get together, we're hoping that is also a great time for you. So without further ado, here is Nick Clayton, and here's our podcast, and we are very excited. So here we go.
Let's do it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Young Guides podcast. I'm Keaton, and
I'm Kyle.
And we are here with a special guest today, Nick Clayton. He does tuna on the fly, searun fishing, has a adverse background in all types of fly fishing, and we're really excited to have him on today. So without further ado, here's Nick. How you doing, Nick?
Good. How you guys doing?
Good. Let's just get this started. Tell us a little bit about your background.
All right. Well, I was born and raised up in Port Angeles, out on the Olympic Peninsula. My mom lived with my mom and stepdad when I was young, and he was the one that got me into fishing. He was kind of obsessed with steelhead fishing in particular, out there kind of in the Mecca back in the early to mid 80s. Started taking me steelhead fishing with him when I was like 4, mostly hanging out on the river and watching. Started trout fishing, all the usual stuff, and just kind of progressed from there. We did, mostly salmon, trout, and steelhead. We didn't really own a saltwater boat to speak of. We'd go out to CQ when I was young and rent the boats from Olson's, those little 16-foot wooden boats they had out there. Run around in the fog out, it's amazing we didn't end up in Canada back then without any electronics or anything. But from day one, I was, just always obsessed with fishing. My mom always tells the story, especially now that I'm, for a living, that from as long as I can remember, she could remember when they'd take me to doctor's appointments. They always had those big fish tanks out in the lobby, and then I would just stand and drool over those fish and just watch them. It's kind of always been my obsession. Growing up out in Port Angeles, it was you kind of had 2 options. You either got into the outdoors or you got into drinking and drugs and partying. I went the outdoors route, fishing, hunting, camping, backpacking, did it all. Used to love to hunt, but fishing was always, number 1 priority. Especially deer and elk season and stuff was kind of right in the heart of really good fishing. So over time, fishing kind of drove that out. Same thing with most other activities, to be honest with you. Fishing just sort of dominated it. But I spent the first, 20, I moved down to the Kitsap area, but the bulk of that, prior to that, was all up on the Olympic Peninsula there, which is sort of, especially at the time, kind of a heaven for somebody that is into the outdoors, and just never went away. Did a lot of other things. I commercial fished for almost 5 years up out of the Bering Sea, right out of high school. Did a bunch of other jobs and things, but fishing was always the constant in my
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, did you pick up searun fishing like recreationally, or when you're in your younger days, or like how did that begin?
Yeah, so I didn't really know about searun cutthroat until not too long before I moved down to the Kitsap area. We had caught them in the Peninsula rivers as a kid, growing up, but I never really associated them with saltwater. They were just cutthroat that we caught out of Klawa and stuff, and
Yes.
sawduck. Um, and I will never forget it. I went on a little camping trip to this little campground down on Hood Canal, me and a buddy and his girlfriend. Basically just we were going to pitch the tent and drink and party for a couple days. And he brought a spinning rod and some MEP spin. What are you doing? He's like, oh, I think there's cutthroat and there's other things. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And that first day we were just all kind of hungover and hanging out on the beach, and he was down just casting away. And all of a sudden he caught like 5 really nice fish in a row. And I was like, what on earth are these things? I just didn't know that much about them. But I didn't really get into fishing for them till I was living in Bremerton and working at the shipyard. And I got full custody of my son. He was 4 years old. So I kind of, overnight, I became a single dad. So my free time became very limited. I couldn't just, head out to the peninsula for a weekend or something and go steelhead fishing. And somewhere along the way, I got into beach fishing for coho, and then learned about sea runs. And it just kind of took off from there, because living where I did, you had to drive 4 hours to get to any moving water. It's up. I had all this shoreline around, so I figured out that if I had a couple 2-3 hour window, I could go down to some of these local beaches and actually have a realistic chance of catching fish. And just kind of took off from there.
Yeah, awesome.
Gotcha. So how long have you been guiding sea runs, and what does that whole process look like for you?
Let's see. I think I started guiding like at the end of 2018 for sea runs. It's I guide from a boat, so it was a bit of a process to get to where I could start. I had to go get a captain's license, which took some time. I hooked up with a guy, just met him online, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, and he was just at the start, getting ready to start his own business. He just got a Coast Guard license. He had a boat. And long story short, we kind of linked up. We fished a lot together, became good friends, and he was doing the same thing that I was wanting to do. So it was a good kind of lit a fire under me to finish up getting my captain's license. We bought a second boat, and then I came on board. I basically bought into the business just after it started. I kind of helped him get it going behind the scenes. And then shortly thereafter, he decided he didn't want to guide anymore. He's got young kids and just in a different place in life. So I ended up basically buying the business, one of the 2 boats from him, and then just kind of took off and started doing my own thing. So it's all from a boat. I don't do any real beach stuff to speak of. I was approached to do beach guiding a few different times over the years. I always thought it was a strange concept, because, I don't really know what a beach guide does. Not that they, I don't want to sound like I'm bad mouthing them, because I'm not. It just seemed strange to me. Like you're just standing there next to a guy, like pointing, hey, try casting over there. And, I guess you gotta have your social skills and your knowledge of all the local stuff. But and the other aspect of it was the sustainability, because if you hire me to take you beach fishing, and I take you to spots that I've worked hard over the years to kind of figure out and learn the timing of, and the maybe sometimes the secret of getting to them, and so on and so forth. Well, if I take you on a Saturday, where are you going to go on Sunday? You're just going to go right back there, and then I'm going to be there with Sunday's clients, and then you're going to be there, and right on down the line. And more than anything, I didn't want to step on the toes of kind of the people, my mentors, if you will, in the beach fishing world. I didn't want people shared stuff with me, and then here all of a sudden I'm taking spots that that they introduced me to, and so I just never went down that road, and now I just do it all by the boat, which is great because there's only so much beach access in Puget Sound with trespassing laws and things being all sorts of so crazy around here. From the boat, I can fish anywhere I want, cover as much water as I need to. These are fish, they're semi-nomadic, so they tend to live in a same general area, but they'll move around within that little area. So being able to cover water and figure out where they're at from day to day is a pretty huge part.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, and the one thing, like from just doing recreational searun fishing, I've noticed that I'll go out one day on the beach and I'm out there and maybe the fishing's great that day, but I'll go out and the next week or the next day. And I mean, things are just changing so much out there. It's like, if you even, I'm just like, if you do beach guide, that is really impressive because those fish are never where you want them to be when you need them to be there. So.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's Puget Sound it's a constantly changing environment. It's essentially a lake with current.
Yep.
And literally from every hour, every day, every tide, everything is constantly changing. I don't know how the beach guys do it. I know there's some guys that do it successfully. The impression I get is that beach guiding, the guys that seem to be doing it well, it's more of a teaching thing as it is more of a just flat out go out and catch fish. That's teaching people how to beach fish. You might go out with a beach guide and not have a great day catching wise, but you'll come away from it with the knowledge of like, okay, I kind of know what to look for. I know how to approach this. So I think you get a lot of that out of those kind of scenarios where with the boat, not that every trip is a just slaying adventure. But I feel like, the ability to cover that water and because you're right, they're there 1 minute, they're gone the next. I've never met a fishery that can make me feel like I'm on top of the world one day and make me feel like I have no clue what I'm doing the next. Sure. They're pretty baffling.
Yeah. Oh yeah. They're a unique species, and it's pretty amazing to have them up here. So
yeah, they're super cool.
When you're looking to find fish, so you said things are changing all the time. Like, what are you looking for to find those spots without giving away some of your secrets? But like, what are you looking for? What's that process of finding those fish for any given day?
The most honest answer is time. Time and just fishing. I get that asked all the time out on the water. Like, well, how did you find this spot? Well, it was dumb luck. I was out there. I always say that the biggest benefit of the boat is that it unlocks the entirety of the Puget Sound. You can fish anywhere. The biggest negative of the boat is that it unlocks the entirety of the Puget Sound. You can fish anywhere. You get out. First day I ever took a boat out, I'm like, oh, jackpot. Now I can finally, and then you start looking around and you're like, there is thousands of miles of shoreline. Like, how on earth do I go about finding fish? There is some general rules of thumb. Cutthroat tend to prefer structure. They kind of behave like a trout in a river. They're gonna use structure to their benefit, especially in the South Puget Sound where I guide. There's a lot of current. It basically turns into a river at times. So they'll use those places with structure and little depressions and channels and things where they can kind of rest behind something or down underneath the current and hang out and let the current bring the food to them so they're not burning a bunch of energy. I like it's a stupid term, but one of my best friends always calls it spidey senses. I'm sure you guys know, you look at a piece of water and you're just like, yeah, I'm not feeling it. Or you might look at something else and go, this just feels fishy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the whole concept of fishy is so bizarre, and it's not something that you could explain to anybody. But you do any fishery long enough, I think you start to develop that sort of sixth sense of like, this just feels right. But in a nutshell, you're looking for structure, rocks, logs in the water, Oyster beaches are great. Anywhere there's freshwater dumping in, creeks, points are good. You want moving water ideally, when the current is moving versus just kind of sitting there stagnant. The fish get more aggressive on the feed, so you find that moving water, and that's where the tides come into play, and knowing where to be at a certain part of the tide. And that's part of what makes the whole thing so unique, is that you could be standing or drifting along the best cutthroat beach on the planet, but if you're not there at the right part of the tide, the current's not moving right, the fish could be there, you'd never even know it.
Yeah.
You go back at a different part of the tide and fish the same spot that you fished, and you would never have thought that there was ever a cutthroat that existed there in the history of the world. And all of a sudden there's cutthroat everywhere. So there's all those little factors. But ultimately, man, it's just time on the water. I've just spent so much time fishing areas. And the problem is, you find a spot and you go out at low tide and you look at a stretch of beach or a nice point or something, and you see, okay, there's nice structure, or there's an oyster beach, or all these little things that the books will tell you, and you fish it and you don't catch anything. And you can't just write that off as a bust. You have to go back and fish it at a different part of the tide, high tide, low tide, incoming, outgoing, slack tide, so on and so forth, before you can truly get a sense. So in that regard, it's just been a lot of time on the water, just fishing areas, a lot of days of not catching much, just exploring, trying new spots. And then occasionally you're like, oh, jackpot, I found one. Or you find something that looks good, so you go back and spend more time on it. It's a lot different than most other fisheries. It's not a river guide. I know I've heard all these stories from river guides where they work a section of rivers so often that they know there's 3 trout that lay right on the backside of that rock or on that seam, and you practically come onto a first name basis with them. With the cutthroat, it's just a totally different ball game because it's changed so much.
Yeah. So I got a question for you. Do you find it better to fish? Like, have you found like weather playing a part in the sea run fishing? Like, do you find that on like maybe the more nastier days you might fish better, or like sunny days? What is your thoughts on that?
So that's another one I get asked a lot. And what I've come to believe over the years is that weather 100% has an effect on these fish. I think it has an effect on all fish. I've also come to believe that ultimately I have no idea what that effect is. So I have had some stellar days on just nasty rain and wind and cold and miserable. I had one of those last week and thinking it was going to be a lights out kind of day, and it was just dead as all get out. Cutthroat's biggest predators are birds. It's death from above.
Yeah.
So on those bright days, I just think they get super skittish. They don't really want to move much. They want to just kind of stay hunkered down and avoid, get.
After hearing all these things, like, what does a normal day look like? Like, you meet your clients. Well, I guess, like, where do you meet your clients? How do you determine you're going to go to this spot or this spot? Process of getting there. What does that whole day look like?
So I keep my boat on a trailer, so I don't necessarily have one spot that I launch from. It kind of depends on the time of the year, what I've been seeing lately, to a certain degree, the customers, because some people prefer to fish, they want to fish out of Point Defiance and Tacoma. They don't want to drive anywhere. I do tend to launch. There's a place to the south called Harstein Island, and there's a launch right there at the bridge. I tend to launch there most of the time. That's my preferred spot. Typical days, 2 days in advance, I'll be in touch with the person that's booked, give them the kind of the final weather call, weather's a big factor out there, for safety and just the fishability and fun factor. If it's blowing 20-25 knots, most people can't fish in that. And get in touch, let them know, hey, we're a go, or weather doesn't look good, or whatever the case is. We meet up. I always get there well in advance. I get the boat in the water, have rods rigged and ready, everything's ready to rock when they show up. We meet up, hop on the boat, pack anything away, I have to do a little safety speech for the Coast Guard, kind of cover, life jackets and all that good stuff. And then as far as where I'm going to start, it depends a lot on the tides more than anything. The tides and the weather. Some days I know I need to, if the wind is going to be blowing, a nuisance amount, I'll try to, there's places that I'll kind of take on depending on where which direction the wind is coming from, so I can kind of find some protection. But the biggest thing is the tides. And that's just, looking at I look at the tides every day, whether I'm fishing or not. And so if I know I have a trip tomorrow, I look at the tide and, okay, it's going to be, incoming in the morning. Okay. So I don't want to fish these other spots until later in the afternoon when the tide's coming in. So I kind of plan around that. And that's where the boat comes in handy, because I can just, once we get on the boat, I can just go kind of wherever I need to go based on what those tides are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a fine line between, like, ultimately the people want to fish. They don't just want a boat ride, driving all over Puget Sound. So I have to factor that in a little bit. I would say I have like a home court, if you will, of, a lot of spots that I found over the years that I just know, okay, ebb tide, I'm going to fish this stretch first, and then I'm going to work to here, and I'm going to work down there. And I try to kind of keep it to something of a sequential order so that I'm not just running from, 1 mile here, 4 miles over there. And, we spend half your day running around. So there's a little bit of planning that goes into that, for sure.
Yeah. So if I was, say I'm a new fisherman, right? Do you cater to newer fishermen? I know that, you got to make decent casts from the beach, but I've never done it from a boat. So do you take out newer anglers? Do you do like a little casting clinic with them? Like, how does that go about?
Yeah, so that's definitely an issue. I guess I don't know what the word would be. When I first started guiding, you start a new guide business, as I'm sure you guys have seen. The hardest part is just getting the ball rolling, getting customers, getting your name out there, getting reviews, word of mouth, and you got to start somewhere. So when people would call or email and be like, "Hey, I've never picked up a fly rod in my life, but I've always been interested in it," I was like, "Rock on, let's go." And then I was humbled very quickly when I figured out that the deck of a boat on Puget Sound is not the easiest place to learn, not only to fly cast, but all the other things that come with fly fishing, line management and, hook sets and fighting a fish with a fly rod and all that stuff. There's just so many things that are difficult to learn while you're also trying to catch fish. It's kind of like, it almost becomes a sensory overload. Anymore, what I tell people, I just had a woman reach out to me last week. Her and her husband don't fish, and they have a 13-year-old son who's never fished, but he wants to catch a salmon on the fly rod. So she wanted to book a trip. And I try to be as honest as I can with these people, that I am more than willing to take you out and work with you to the best of my ability. But what I really recommend is going at the very least and getting a casting lesson, like getting something under your belt, because you're paying a lot of money to come out, and it just gets to be too much. And people, I think it's common in guiding and chartering and stuff. They have these levels of expectation that I've never held a fly rod before, but I'm paying this guy to take me out. So I'm going to walk off and I'm going to be, lefty cray. And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I'm always envious of like drift boat angler, like on the Yakima and stuff, that where you have that luxury of like rigging them up with an indicator and a nymph and having them flop, 20 feet of line in the water and using the boat to your advantage. On the Sound, I really only have so much I can do. I tell people, if you can give me 40 feet, we can work with that. If it's less than that, it gets to be a struggle. So I'm not a casting instructor. Those people exist for a reason. Teaching fly casting is a whole different skill set and beyond just 20-foot roll casts. And so I tell them, like, look, I'm more than happy. I know enough to help you out, and we'll go out and have fun and everything else. But if those fish are 50, 60 feet away and I can't approach them any differently, or I can't, they spook from the boat, there's only so much that we can do. So I really try to be as honest as I can there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. All right, awesome. So we've talked a lot about your searun fishing and kind of your searun business, but there's also another side to the coin of Nick. He also does tuna fishing, which I've personally gone out with Nick on the tuna boat, and it was a great freaking time. And this is a little funny story, is when I went out with Nick, I didn't know it was actually Nick. So I was like sitting back there, I was doing gear, and he pulls out a fly rod, and I go up to him. I'm like, "Oh, you fly fish?" And he's like, "For tuna?" And he's like, "Yeah." We just started talking, and then he started explaining more, which we'll get into here in a minute. But yeah, once I got to know Nick's a great guy, awesome guide, and I'm sure he's going to explain some cool stuff to us. So let's get rolling in that. What got you into doing tuna in general?
Well, I commercial albacore fished in 2015, I think it was. I'd spent 10 years working at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, and I left that job. I was miserable and didn't know what I was going to do, and I kind of stumbled on this opportunity to work. Okay, cool. So I went and did that, and that kind of opened my eyes. I always knew that we had this albacore fishery. I didn't know a lot about it off of our coast, but went and commercial fished and was pretty intrigued with albacore. I wanted to learn sport fishing for them, and more than that, I wanted to learn to see if I could get them on the fly rod. I kept a 12 weight on the commercial boat and made some casts. And then at night when we'd shut down and I was waiting for dinner, never caught one, but based on what I had seen, the commercial albacore fishery they fish for, it's all hook and line, and it's all really shallow. Nobody's fishing deep. I just kept thinking, there's no way I couldn't catch these on the fly rod. In the midst of that, I was introduced to Mark Coleman, who owns all rivers and saltwater charters, and they are. I'm biased because I work for them, but they are the biggest charter boat company in Washington State. Their reputation kind of speaks for themselves, and they are specifically known as the tuna guys. So the following year, I heard that Mark was looking for deckhands. So I thought, what better way to learn sport fishing for albacore than to deckhand? And I also had this big picture goal of getting my captain's license, and that's a great way to get your sea time working as a deckhand. And ultimately, for a lot of years, even way back when I was working at the shipyard, I've had this kind of dream of one day running my own thing, and ultimately, I wanted to not expose, I guess is the right word, but open up all of Washington's saltwater fly fishing. Around the world, people are fishing for everything that swims in the ocean with fly rods. And up here, there's this stigma of like, oh, you want to catch salmon on a fly rod, you got to have downriggers, you got to use herring, you can't do this stuff with a fly rod. And there is a ton of opportunity in Washington people just aren't aware of. Ocean coho on the fly is as cool as it gets. Rockfish on the fly, as much fun as you can have with a rod in your hand. There's all this stuff, and I thought this is a great opportunity. So I ended up working deckhanding for Mark for 3 seasons. The seasons are basically March through October, so thereabouts. They start with bottom fish and then halibut and salmon and everything. And then when tuna show up, we shift over and do tuna. After the 3rd year, I was done. I got my captain's license, and I was doing the sound on my own year round. And then that changed partly because one of his captains quit, and he had an opening, and he called me up. And also, I loved doing it too much. It was a really hard thing for me to give up doing. I love the ocean more than anything in the world. I love being on the ocean. I love fishing on the ocean. It's kind of, it's it for me. So he basically offered me the opportunity to come down and run a boat for him. And I did under the stipulation that I told him that I was going to be kind of pushing for fly fishing for these things. I had been doing it. I kept a rod on the boat when I was a deckhand. I'd pull it out here and there. I didn't get too many opportunities because as the deckhand, you're kind of, busy. So I started running the boat for him. This will be coming up. It'll be my 4th year running the boat. 2 years ago, I think Keaton, you came out in 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hadn't done any like actual fly only trips at that point. I was pulling the rod out constantly. But 2 years ago, I did, I think like 8 or 10 fly only trips, and through people that I knew through Washington fly fishing, things like that, where kind of like-minded people that were, again, the stigma of like, oh, you got to have anchovies, you got to fish bait, and I kept saying, I know we can do this. It's an expensive trip, whether you're going on a charter or you have your own boat. It's an expensive trip. It's a hard thing to justify, like sacrificing the quote sure thing, fishing bait and everything else, to go out there and kind of experiment with fly rods. And nobody had really been doing that. There's been a lot of people over the years that have gone out. They go on a tuna trip and they bring a fly rod. And at the end of the day, if fishing's gone well and there's fish around still, they'll pull it out and see if they can get one on the fly rod. But very few people have been going out and legitimately like leaving the gear behind and seeing what they could do with fly rods. I definitely wasn't the first, but from a charter perspective, very, very little of that. So we did some trips 2 seasons ago that were extremely, extremely productive. We opened a lot of people's eyes. Yeah. I'll never forget. It was probably the highlight of my fishing existence. It was maybe the second fly trip that we did. I had a group of 4 guys. We brought nothing but fly rods, and we went out and put, I think it was like 41 albacore or something on the boat, and we were done by like 12:30.
Yeah.
And when we hit the dock in Westport, it was the benefit of like that particular day was like as good at tuna fishing as anybody had ever seen. People have been doing it for 100 years, and it's just all the stars aligned. But we hit the dock, and I'll never forget it. It was like there was this like wave of energy just kind of rolling over Westport, and everywhere I went, I went back to the crew house. I went to the grocery store, and I'm running into people. Westport's a pretty small place. And everybody was like, did you guys really go out and plug the boat with fly rods? And, I was getting messages on Instagram and Facebook and people, various fishing forums. There was people posting, did you hear that these guys went out and did this? And it was kind of like we busted the door down that weekend. We had 2 days in a row of just stellar fishing. And that kind of lit things off. And then coming into this season, I ended up with I think like 22 or something fly only trips booked through, it's all through Washington fly fishing or All Rivers and Saltwater Charters. It's not my business per se. They just kind of give me the leeway to, I don't advertise it per se, but I put it out there and people that are, interested in it. I love doing it. And what we've established over 2 years now is that it's extremely effective. I wouldn't say it's more effective than fishing anchovies, but it is 100% not a handicap.
Yeah.
Every single trip I've done, I've probably done 30 of them now or something. Every single trip, we have 4 boats that we run in Westport, and the guys with the fly rods have outfished one of our boats at least one time every day.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
And we've been right in the mix. Whatever fishing is available that day, if on average the guys with the anchovies are getting 18 to 20 fish a day, we're right in that ballpark. I've not had one day where the guys fishing bait go out and just light the world on fire and we come back with 2 fish. It's a very effective thing, and it's super cool. It's super unique. It's not for everybody. It's a very intense trip. It's a long run on the ocean. It's a long day. The boats that we fish on, they're not a fly fishing platform. It requires some unique casting and things. I try to be pretty open with people, and we're not casting, stimulators with 5 weights here. These are 12 weights and fast sinking lines and big fish patterns and things. But man, when it all comes together, it's pretty freaking rad. The more I do it, I've just, more and more people are into it. And we're finding, new techniques, and I'm kind of learning as I go. But it's pretty rad. The end of last year and into this year, started getting them on poppers on top water when it was good. And man, that's as cool as it gets. Like, you're in 6,000 feet of water and you see these fish swim up at 40 or 50 miles an hour and just explode out of the water on your popper. It's as cool as it gets.
So I gotta ask. Let me give a little background and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this. But so you attract, you're going what, 20, 30 miles an hour with poppers off the back of your boat when you're attracting with gear. Are you doing the same thing when you're on the fly, to like doing the attractor rods, or how does that work out?
Yeah, so on a typical just standard trip, you troll around. You're trolling, stuff that's in the top foot of the water column. You're not trolling deep. It's basically just like big hoochies and thing with lead in the head and keeps it in the water. We're not going that fast, but 6-7 knots is pretty standard. And it's just a searching method. You're looking to get bit one time. As soon as you get bit, you stop the boat. You start fishing live bait, because when you get bit by one albacore, there's a school there. So I kind of go about it the same way. Ideally, if the fish are showing themselves, because you'll find them crashing bait on the surface, jumping, things like that. And in those scenarios, we just basically kind of get into position and start casting to them. But most of the time, you got to find them, and trolling is just the most effective way. So basically, do the same thing, only we just troll flies with heavy sinking lines, and that's one of the ways where fly fishing, I think, shines over gear fishing, is that you troll 5 to 6, 7 knots, and it's not so much a speed thing to trigger a bite, because you could troll something super slow. It's more about just covering water, moving fast enough to cover water, because the ocean's so big and you just got to cover water to find them. Well, when you're trolling with flies, you're using the heavy sinking line to keep your fly in the water. So you can fish a fly of any size, any weight, doesn't matter. When you're trolling with gear, you're reliant on the weight of the lure that you are using to keep that in the water. And if you're trolling 5-6 knots, you've got to have something heavy enough to where it's not just flying out of the water over every wave. So with the fly rod and the fly line, it allows you to fish smaller, more natural stuff that albacore more used to seeing, especially size and profile wise. So I think trolling wise, a lot of people are kind of like, yeah, we're just trolling for them. And it's like, yeah, we are, but we're just hoping to find a school. That's all we're doing. Once we hook one, then we stop, we start casting to them.
Yeah.
But from a just pure catching fish side of things, trolling with fly rods, in my opinion, is more effective. Mm-hmm. Because you can fish, you have such a bigger variety of things that you can fish. You can fish little 2-inch bait fish patterns and things, because the albacore, they can be every bit as selective as any spring creek trout you'll ever encounter. I always tell this story. One of the first days that I brought a fly rod along as a deckhand, we were finishing up our trip, and there was fish all around the boat. We put 7 albacore on the boat that day in 2.5 hours. It was just insanity. I made a few casts from the bow. Nothing had happened. I still saw fish boil on the surface here and there, but they weren't biting my fly. I was reeling in my line, and I look up, and about 200 yards kind of off our port bow, there was National Geographic video of tuna just boiling on the surface, crashing on this little bait fish that are called sorry. And they're eating these little 1.5 inch, 2-inch, really thin bait fish. And I was watching these things, and they're coming closer and closer to I just stood on the bow and waited till it got within casting range, and I made a cast into, what had to have been 1,000 albacore, just frothing, boiling, watered madness.
Yeah.
And it's the single coolest fly cast I've ever made in my entire life. And I was shaking so bad, thinking as soon as my fly hit the water, it's just going to get murdered. How could it not, And I was fishing like a 5-inch kind of anchovy pattern. And I made probably a dozen casts into those fish, and they didn't even sniff it, wouldn't look at it. They were so keyed in on these tiny little bait fish, that big 5-inch fly, they wanted nothing to do with it. But it's just a prime example of like how selective can be. But it's extremely effective trolling for them. And the one of the other big reasons is when you're trolling, you hook up on the troll and you stop the boat. What a lot of people do is they like to fish jigs or swim baits at that point. They'll send a swim bait back on what we call the slide. So you're trolling at 5 or 6 knots and you hook up on the troll. You instantly put the boat in neutral, but the boat keeps moving. It's still got momentum. And that's what we call the slide. It's still moving along. So what a lot of people do is as soon as somebody will hook up, they'll pitch a swim bait back out and just let it sink while the boat comes to a stop, and then they'll work it back up. And essentially they're working that swim bait over a school of fish, and it's a pretty effective method. With fly fishing, when you hook up on the troll, you don't have to send anything out. You already have your fly lines in the water. So you can fish the slide, as we call it, immediately. And man, it's effective. Like we hook so many fish. Somebody hook up on the troll, stop the boat. I tell people to wait like 10, 15 seconds to let their fly sink and let things settle and just start stripping it back. And, we're usually fishing like 4, sometimes 5 rods at a time. And it's not at all uncommon for everybody to instantly hook up, stripping their fly back in. So that's another advantage. It's pretty rad.
Yeah, that's so cool.
What does that process look like? 4 or 5 people all at once fighting these hard.
Well, Keaton could tell you it's sheer chaos. Party. Yep.
You're running around. It's insane.
Yeah. Even when you're fishing bait, fishing anchovies, it's the same concept. It's a whole process. We do a pretty lengthy talk at the dock before we even leave the dock, covering all of that, because there's some very important aspects of it. But ultimately, you have to do what we call the tuna dance. You have to come to terms with the fact that you are never going to control where an albacore goes. You can't turn it head. If you're a good angler, you can turn the head on a 40-pound Chinook. You're never, ever going to turn the head of a 10-pound albacore. You have to physically go with it. It's the only way to avoid getting tangled up. So if you need to be directly on top of that fish at all times, so you're just constantly moving around the boat. It's part of what makes that fishery so fun. You hook a fish and you stand in one place, and the guy next to you hooks a fish and stands in one place, and so on down the line. Eventually, those fish are moving around. They're circling. They're doing all the things that tuna do. They're just going to wrap up and tangle and cut off. So you have to go over people, under people, over people, back underneath, over to the other side of the boat, just constantly moving. It's sheer organized chaos, and it's about as fun as you can have on the water, whether you're gear fishing or fly fishing. I prefer to fly fish, but gear fishing is it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
You got to be kind of close, as I found out, with the people on the boat, because you get pretty up and personal. You're handing the rod in front of their stuff.
Oh yeah.
You're like behind them, like back hugging them, trying to get by them. So. Yep,
it's pretty awesome. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. Like I said, it's not for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But I always tell people that if you have any interest in fishing whatsoever, you owe it to yourself to try albacore at least once. You might not like the long run on the ocean. You might not like being outside the side of land, all that other stuff. But man, there's very few things like it.
Absolutely. So what, you do tuna, you do searun. What's like your favorite time to guide? Like what time of the year is you're like, yeah, this is like the season I enjoy?
Man, that's a tough question because I love it all. That's what I really like about my life right now is that I, spend 4 to 6 months on Puget Sound, and then I spend the rest of the year on the ocean. So basically, the ocean it's a grind. That is much more of a intense physical thing for me. From a work perspective, we go 7 days a week, barring bad weather days, which I know, Keaton, you got weathered out this year on that bottom fish trip. But it's physical, and there's a lot more responsibility on my end, I guess, as the captain. If I'm taking people 50, 60, 70 miles out into the ocean, their lives I'm responsible for. There's a lot more people management and things. So come October, I'm pretty burned out. Your body takes a beating just being on the ocean every day. Everything else aside, the ocean itself is mean. And then I get to come back to the Sound, and it's like starting over again, like it's all fresh and new. And then come March, I'm kind of over the Sound, I guess you could say, and ready. Starting to itch to get back on the ocean, and so I never really get burned out. But I would say my two favorite things on the Sound is like this time of year, November into early December. I love cutthroat fishing this time of year. It seems to be a lot of bigger fish. The fish are hungry. They're feeding. They're like kind of getting prepped into their winter spawn mode. So they're just gorging. So when you can find them, you usually catch them. And then I like later in the winter and the early spring, when the resident coho are around, just because they're so dumb and they're so much fun. And then I love tuna. I just love tuna fishing. It gets in your blood. It's the kind of thing that it can ruin you on a lot of other fisheries. Trolling for salmon is quite frankly, just boring compared to tuna fishing. It's there's something about just crossing that bar and going well beyond cell range and the sight of land, and you're just in a whole different world out there. And it's the kind of thing that you just get addicted to. It would be a hard thing to give up. It really would.
Yeah. That's cool.
Gotcha. So what is the best advice that you would give your younger self, or saying it as when you first start out guiding, like knowing what you know now, your experience guiding, what would you tell yourself when you first started?
Don't sweat the small stuff so much. Don't worry. I've wanted to guide since I was, a teenager, probably. I was always attracted to it. I think I built the concept of guiding so high. So I built it up in my head so much that it took a long time for me to kind of get over that hurdle. I built it up into my head that like you could only be a guide if you reached a certain level, or you reached the pinnacle of fishing and you were just so good at what you do and so good at catching fish, and you knew everything about it, every little detail. And knowing what I know now, I would have started doing it a long time ago. I think I was ready a long time ago. I just didn't know that I was ready, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
I jumping in and working for Mark Coleman, I knew his reputation, and he's kind of put on a pedestal around here, not so much in the fly fishing world, but in the gear and charter fishing world. The guy is just known as, the greatest thing since sliced bread. And he really is. He's a great fisherman. He's a great captain. But one thing I noticed right away when I first went to deckhand for him, and some of the captains that I worked with, and these captains that I was around who were, legendary captains in this area, as far as, what they do, is that most of them will flat tell you they don't know what they're doing half the time. It's just, you just got to get in there and you got to do it. You got to be confident. You got to just get in and do it. And instead of like trying to reach this level that I kind of invented in my head, if I would have just had that confidence, 10, 15 years ago, I could have just jumped right in, and I don't think life would have been maybe any different. It's one of those things you just got to get in and do it. I was listening to a little bit of your guys's intro episodes about yourselves. And Kyle, I was listening to yours just before I got on here, and you were talking about like you'd never really fished the Yakima, or you'd never guided the, whatever it was when you were talking about, but somebody approached you and was like, hey, let's do this. And you're like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
I think there's this misconception that like fishing guides are like, I don't want to say better at fishing than other people, but like they just have it all figured out. And I've yet to meet one that would tell you that they've got it all figured out. Like most of us guys that have been doing it for 50 years. One of the guys that runs one of the biggest, most well-known charter boats in Westport, he's been doing it for 53 years. He told us a story last year coming in on a tuna season on the radio about his first trip on Puget Sound, chartering and mooching for salmon. And he was left shoal in the dark and was driving the boat out to where he was going to fish, reading How to Mooch for Dummies or something on a book on his way out there because he had no idea what he was doing. And literally, I think, everyone I know will tell you that. Like, yeah, we don't know secrets. Like, I have a lot of experience and I'm pretty good at finding and catching fish. It's just something I've always been pretty good at. But man, I don't know. I don't have it all figured out.
Yeah, it's kind of like you just start figuring out what to look for, where you're looking, the signs that you need to look for, and you got to get good at finding that, and then that will help you find the fish.
Yeah, it's not like a lot of people seem to think that you just, it's not like you're a professional baseball player and you've worked yourself up through high school and college and minor leagues, and you finally got drafted, or you finally got called up to the big leagues, and now you've attained this. Like, it's just the drive, it's the desire to get out there and do it and meet new people and be willing to kind of put yourself out there. So if I'd have known that a long time ago, I probably would have got into it a long time ago.
Yeah, this is kind of a little funny story. Is I work down at Orvis, and I get people coming in and they're like, "Oh, what's like the best thing to use this time of year?" And I look at them and I'm kind of like, "Well, you could use this like general tractor pattern," and they're like expecting that that reaction of like, "Oh, you need the size 14 elk hair caddis in a in a white color."
Yeah.
And, I'm like,
extended body, crippled dun emerger.
I'm like, yeah, here's a purple haze. Go give this a shot. And most of the time it works. It's just, so like
I have fully embraced that. Like I used to, granted I fish saltwater, so my life's a little different than what you guys do. But I fully embraced to the point that I think fishing is so overcomplicated by 99.9% of the fishing world. Fly fishermen are terrible at it, but gear fishermen are just as bad. You talk to salmon fishermen and you got to have this color flasher, and you got to run, your leader has to be exactly 38.5 inches long if you're fishing for Chinook, and it has to be 26 inches long if you're fishing for coho. That was one of the biggest things I learned when I started working charter boats. I thought, I'm going to learn all these new techniques. It's really going to open my game. I've been fishing my whole life, but this is going to take me over the top. And it was the exact opposite. Every single successful charter and guide I know simplifies fishing to the bare essentials, because all that other crap doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I fished, when I'm tuna fishing, I think I only did 50 something tuna trips. I don't ever change troll spread. I don't ever change troll lures. I don't change color. I don't change size. I keep it in the water, and I know I will catch fish if I drive over the top of a school albacore. And lo and behold, we do. Yeah. And it's the same thing on the sound. I don't change flies very much. I'm not, unless I see a reason to, and there is a time, but I just like to keep it simple. Yeah.
What's the best advice that you could give to a new guide that's just starting or looking to start?
Aside from like all the ins and outs of all the things that come along with guiding, I think you have to guide for the right reasons. I think you have to guide because you love to do it. And if that is not your number one reason, then you're going to burn out really quickly. Oh. It's got to be a labor of love. I've never worked so hard to be so poor in my entire life. I've never been happier. I have zero regrets, but you're not going to get rich guiding, and you're just not. and you're going to work your tail off. But the other thing is just, you have to be confident. You have to, it's a tough thing putting yourself out there, especially in 2021 with social media. And, it's kind of a necessary evil. You've got to have an internet presence. And by putting yourself out there, you're just opening the world to come in and, hate on you. And you're going to get those bad posts and bad reviews. And you have to be confident. I think that is the biggest key. Dealing with people, on the water, dealing with people on the internet. Just embrace that you're there for a reason, and this is what you want to do, and that just comes with the territory. It's the hardest part for me. I'm very much an introvert, and I don't like to put myself out there, but you have to do it, and you just got to kind of bite the bullet and go for it.
Yeah, gotcha. So, is there anything else that we haven't talked to you about yet before we get to some listener questions and rapid fire round? Is there anything that we haven't asked you yet that you think we should know and that our listeners should know about you or about your guiding, any of that?
I don't know. I've rambled off and on quite a bit about ultimately I just love to fish. I love to be out there. I love watching people catch fish, being a part of it. I'm every bit as enthused when a customer catches a nice fish as I've ever been for myself to catch a nice fish. And that's not just guide BS, it's the truth.
Yeah.
The second that changes, I'm done. The second that enthusiasm, and whether it's a 12-inch cutthroat or a 30-pound albacore or whatever, it doesn't matter. Catching fish has always been my obsession. It's what excites me. It's what I dream about. And then the second that goes away, I'll find something else to do. But I've been fishing for a long time now and it hasn't changed yet. So yeah, I don't know.
Gotcha. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Keaton, you want to take us into our couple listener questions?
Yeah. The one by Kyle on the Fly, which we just had on last week. She asked, how did you get into offshore fishing? I think you covered that pretty well up above. You kind of explained your story and got to that.
Yeah.
We have one from Kent Wilkinson, 63. He wanted to know, what was the best time to fish for tuna out of Washington?
That's a common question. It's a really tough one to answer because tuna, unlike salmon, they're not returning to Washington. They're not coming back to spawn in our rivers. So it's a tough thing time-wise. If I was going to book a trip, I would say second week of August through the first 2 weeks of September, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yep.
But the season can start. I've seen it start as early as mid-June, and I've seen it go as almost into November.
Gotcha.
I just think that window is probably, on average, it's probably where I would recommend.
Nice.
Cool.
And then I had one more question for you. This was me being a listener. Do you do any recreational fishing? Like, do you get off the sound? Do you ever go to like fishing in rivers or lakes or anything for fun?
I do. Usually if I'm going to go fish for fun, I go out on the sound, to be honest with you. Yeah. I got into fly fishing on lakes. I've always loved lakes. So I do still go. I have some buddies that are big into it. So every year or two, it seems I'll go hop on with them and go fish. I haven't fished a river in probably 15, 20 years. I've done very little traditional river fly fishing in my life. Fished the Yakima one time years and years ago. I had no idea what I was doing or where I was going. And, there's a lot of things I'd like to do. I'd love to do tiger muskie. That's on my dream for a while. I bought the rods and reels and lines. I tied up a bunch of flies. I just haven't found the time to go do it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if it'll eat a fly, I'm more than happy to fish for it. I'm pretty content to fish the saltwater year round. But I'm definitely not against, if I get an invite and I can make it work, like, heck yeah, I'll go do it.
Yeah. Awesome.
For sure. All right. I think that'll bring us into our rapid fire round. We got a couple minutes here. What is your favorite fish?
Probably lingcod.
Oh yeah, lingcod are sick.
Lingcod or I think my favorite fish to fly fish for was probably coho, but my favorite fish overall would be lingcod.
Nice.
What's your dream destination to go fly fishing?
Like the Seychelles or not so much Christmas Island anymore. It seems like that's kind of gotten past what it once was, but some of these like newer atolls that are popping. I want to do GTs and milk.
Cool.
Cool. What's your favorite what's your favorite meal and your favorite drink when you're hitting the water?
Man, I almost never eat on the water ever. Jerky, I guess, if I'm going to have something, or pepperoni sticks, something like that.
Gotcha.
And then I drink those smart waters, or the ones with those religiously, because they keep me from cramping up when I'm working 7 days a week.
Yeah.
That and coffee. Coffee would be the other one.
Gotcha.
What's your pump up jam on the way to go guide?
It's funny. There's a song from Iron Maiden called "Where the Wild Wind Blows," that for whatever reason is like that's the one. It has been for a long time.
Yeah.
Nice. Heck yeah. All right, so you're heading out the door to guide or to go fishing. What is the first thing that you grab that you can't leave the house without?
My coffee. I've got two big Cook thermoses, one for the road to drive to the boat launch, and then one to bring it on the water. And if I forget that, it's going to be a bad day. Everything else I usually have loaded in the boat, ready to rock the night before. So I'm pretty anal about that, but gotta have the coffee.
Gotcha.
Okay, this is a question here. What's your best advice for just any newcomers starting in the sport?
Just starting into fly fishing?
Yeah, just in general. Like if someone's like, they wake up, they're like, hey, I want to try searun fishing, or hey, I want to go do this. What's your best advice to them?
Just do it. Don't get intimidated. Fly fishing, for whatever reason, has this like intimidation factor. You walk into a fly shop and here's all these $1,000 fly rods and $500-$600 wading jackets and things that and you start looking around. It's really, really easy to get intimidated by it all. So I think the biggest thing is to just remember that it's just fishing. It's a different technique, different tackle, whatever, but it's just fishing. Fish aren't super smart. This isn't. It's not. We're not going out and saving the world and coming up with foreign policy and whatever. It's just fishing. Just try not to get intimidated. And then, as far as like saltwater fly fishing, I think casting lessons is the way to go. It's just a different world in the salt. That was probably the biggest eye opener to me when I started guiding. I'm pretty good at catching fish in the saltwater with a fly rod. Nobody's gonna film me and make a casting video, but I can get a fly anywhere I need to go in just about any condition and crazy real world scenarios and so on and so forth. And I thought, oh, cool, I could just take people out and they can catch fish. And I quickly figured out not everybody can cast 80 feet. Not everybody can double haul, and not everybody can make 500 casts in a day on Puget Sound, just blind casting and stripping fast and things like that. But I think casting is ultra important in fly fishing in general, but I think 100 times more so in the saltwater world. So I think it's money well spent. People spend $1,000 on fly rods and all the gear and everything, and look like they know what they're doing, and then they get out on the water and they can't actually cast. They can't actually fish. Spend $100, couple $100. I don't know what a casting lesson or a couple of them costs, but I think that's the quickest way to shorten the learning curve is get a little bit of casting knowledge under your belt first and then go at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Well, there's a little tradition that we do, and I think Kyle's gonna kick you off into this, but Kyle, go ahead.
Yeah. So We like to end every episode asking a guest your favorite guide story or like outdoor moment or like favorite memory.
Oh man, that's a tough one. uh, yeah, I mentioned getting albacore on poppers. The first albacore I got on a popper is the crowning achievement of my fly fishing experience. Um, that was pretty amazing. I was on a trip, a guided trip, and I was in the bow, and I made 7 casts or 8 casts, and every cast the fish came up on my popper and either tried to eat it or rejected it at the last second. And the 8th or whatever it was cast, it came out of the water. I was literally telling myself in my head, don't lift the rod, because I'd already pulled the fly out of 2 fish's face. Saw that fish because they just, it's not like other fish where you can see them follow a fly. They come up from below. So you see nothing but clear blue water, and all of a sudden you see this just murderous streak coming from below. That fish came clear out of the water. I could see my popper in its mouth. It hit the water head first, kind of swam down, and I watched my line just come tight. And it took everything I could not to set that hook, but I kept it tight. And man, I absolutely lost my mind. Like I totally forgot I was guiding, and the guys on the boat, I knew most of them that day, and they all said that was like their favorite moment was just listening to me on the bow, like losing.
That's awesome.
But guiding wise, my very first guide trip on Puget Sound is one I'll never forget. That was it was like, culmination of a lot of dreams and work and effort and things. And then it finally came together, and I had a successful day, and I'll never forget it. I got boat on the trailer, got it cleaned up, hit the road, and I called my one of my best friends, and he knew what I was doing that day. And he said something, and when he answered, and I just said, dude, I just got paid to take people fishing. And like that concept was, it still blows my mind to this day. All the lousy jobs I've had in my life that is. So that's probably my most memorable guide moment.
That's awesome. So if people are looking to do go on a trip with you via, on Albacore or on searuns, how would they reach you? What can they follow to find you? All that.
I'm fairly active on Instagram. I try to be. My Instagram is Captain CAPT _ Clayton. And then I have a website, southsoundskiffs.com, for all my Puget Sound stuff. My contact info's on there, phone number, email, all that stuff. And then the tuna side of things, it's all washingtonfishing.com, because I'm just contracted to run one of their 4 boats. I don't do the booking side of things. I always tell people I will certainly answer questions and help, but ultimately, the Mary, the wife owner, she does all of that, and they just have to get a hold of her and tell her that they want to go with me and that they want to go fly fishing, and she'll work with them, and she'll get a hold of me if there's any issues or anything, and we kind of work together to make it happen. But anybody that's interested in it can certainly reach out to me directly. I'm on Facebook, YouTube, all that stuff, but and I can.
Sweet. All right.
Yeah. Well, Nick, we really appreciate you sitting down with us tonight and talking about yourself, talking about guiding for sea runs and tuna. And it's been a great hearing all these cool stories, and sounds like it's a pretty unique fishery, especially even unique to most types of ocean fishing or saltwater fishing. So it was really cool to hear your story.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was good hanging out with you guys. Appreciate you.
And I've gone out with Nick a time, and I had a absolute blast. The experience is great. Nick is a great person, guide, mentor. He'll get you going in the right direction. I can't talk enough good things about Nick, and I hope that you guys can get out on the water with Nick. So,
for sure.
Well, this was another episode of the Young Guides podcast, and as always, I'm Keaton, and this is
Kyle.
Thanks for listening.
Catch you on the next one.